Is called to order. It is my distinct pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our panel on the right to work and access to the labor market. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you all. I now give the floor to Ms. Masumi Ono, Chief of Social Inclusion and Participation Branch in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, for her presentation in connection with the conference room paper A/AC.278/2020/CRP.3. Ms. Ono, you have the floor.
Good, good morning, Excellencies, colleagues. Thank you, Chair. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, very good. Yes, I'm very pleased to present the substantive inputs on the focus area, right to work and access to the labor market in the context of older persons. I will provide some highlights from the analysis contained in the document before you, which covers national legal and policy framework, availability, accessibility, acceptability and quality, equality and non-discrimination, and remedies and redress. On national legal and policy frameworks, we found that legal provisions and policy frameworks recognizing the right to work for all citizens exist in most countries, including national constitutions, labor codes and employment acts, anti-discrimination legislation, laws, national policies, regulations, national development plans, and applicable regional or international frameworks and bodies. There are some key challenges, for instance, age-based discrimination, and here the discrimination is stronger when it intersects with gender and disability, for example. There are barriers to employment that push older persons to retire or prevent them from remaining employed. Accessibility conditions and work environment adaptations are inadequate or non-existent. Other challenges include higher rates of vulnerable and informal employment, lack of access to training, and when it comes to data and research, especially on informal work, it is often not disaggregated by age and gender, and it at times does not include older persons. On access to labor market, various measures exist, such as dedicated employment systems, training opportunities, and workplace accommodations. Regarding the availability of specialized services targeted for older workers, they differ as a result of different policy priorities. And many countries actually reported on diverse incentives aimed at facilitating their employment and retention. Many best practices were reported on adopting age-inclusive policies and legal provisions, pension reforms, changes to social protection systems, investments in skills training and development for older adults, and improving research and data. However, some respondents raised concerns over the adequacy of protection provided to older workers due to barriers in access to justice, and older people engaged in the informal sector certainly remain unprotected under these measures. Regarding equality and non-discrimination, there are several important points that emerged. Firstly, submissions often framed non-discrimination of older persons' right to work and access to the labor market in general clauses of non-discrimination in their legislation that include age as a ground. Secondly, the relevance of regional frameworks and instruments such as the Inter-American Convention on Protecting the Human Rights of Older Persons and the European Union legislation were highlighted. Thirdly, where policies and legislation for older persons exist, discrimination against older persons may be prohibited broadly or in some cases specifically with respect to the right to work and access to the labor market. And finally, this is a point that has come up in other contexts, and that is that many inputs showed that regardless of existing discrimination provisions in national legislation, ageism and ageist stereotypes negatively impact the enjoyment of the right to work and access to the labor market by older persons. What remedies and redress exist? Administrative and judicial mechanisms exist in some countries. Several states reported the human rights commissions or tribunals as the primary means of redress for older workers. Other submissions highlighted government-funded helplines established to assist people, including older persons with discrimination concerns. The challenge here is that high legal costs and lengthy proceedings often discourage litigation by older workers. That is all from me. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to discussing.
Thank you so much, Masumi, for your presentation. Following the presentation, we will now proceed with an interactive panel discussion. The panel is moderated by Ms. Beate Andres, Special Representative to the United Nations and Director of the International Labour Organization, Office for the United Nations. The panelists who are joining us this morning are Ms. Claudia Marley, Independent Expert on the Enjoyment of All Human Rights by Older Persons, Ms. Astrid Dentler, Member of Cabinet of Vice President for Democracy and Demography, European Commission, Ms. Liat Ayalon, Social Work Deputy Director, School of Social Work, Bar Ilan University in Israel, and Mr. Chris Gardner, founder and CEO of Christopher P. Gardner Foundation, Incorporated. I would now like to invite the moderator and panelists to commence the panel discussion. I give the floor to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Excellencies, dear panelists, participants, it is a great privilege and pleasure to moderate this session as ILO representative. The topic is very important and something that the ILO has also dealt with over the years. We have a very distinguished panel that, Chair, you already introduced. Thank you so much. However, before proceeding, I would like to inform the working group about some organizational arrangements for this meeting. So first, this informal meeting relies on remote simultaneous interpretation. So please be mindful that additional difficulties may be experienced by the interpreters when working remotely. There might be an increased likelihood of disruptions to the audio feed. So please, if that happens, bear with us. You may select the preferred language to hear the interpretation or choose the none option to hear the original language. Now, you won't be able to unmute your microphones or engage your video unless you're given the floor. When called up to speak, you will receive a message saying that your streaming is approved. Please press the video button appearing in that message in order to share your video and your audio. And if you face audio or video issues during the meeting, please use the Restart All Lines button above the hand icon. And should the problem persist, please reload your browser. So with this now said, I have the pleasure to open our panel discussion. And I would like to start and invite Mrs. Claudia Marley. As we already heard, Mrs. Marley is an independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons. And she has been working also for the German Institute for Human Rights as a senior researcher. She's also been a visiting professor at the Ali Solomon Hochschule and has, in 2000, she was appointed as vice president of the Human Rights Commission for a particular region in Austria, Tyrol, and Vorarlberg. Mrs. Marley, it is my pleasure to invite you to give your presentation. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Madam Vice Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends. It is an honor to participate in this important panel and to address you in my capacity as independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons. I would like to thank Masumi Ono for the introduction of the working document, which provides a perfect basis for this discussion. My remarks today will briefly touch on two elements. Firstly, I wish to reflect on the meaning and importance of the right to work and how it applies to older persons. Secondly, I want to refer to some of the challenges faced by older persons to enjoy their right to work, particularly in relation to ageism and age discrimination. The right to work is essential for the realization of other human rights, as well as for achieving many of the sustainable development goals. We live in societies that value work and productivity. Participation in the labor market enhances self-esteem, social inclusion, and financial security. Therefore, inequality and discrimination in different aspects of work and employment have a tremendous effect on the enjoyment of the human rights and well-being in general, for older persons and for everyone. Given the centrality of work, it is imperative to apply a human rights-based approach in line with the international human rights law and ILO's normative framework on the right to work and access to the labor markets. This framework recognizes the right of everyone to a freely chosen or accepted work in decent conditions and requires that states take certain steps for the full realization of the right to work. A core obligation in this respect is to ensure non-discrimination and equal protection of employment. The principle of non-discrimination includes age discrimination. Older workers should enjoy equality of opportunity and treatment in relation to all aspects of work and conditions of employment in all sectors. Nevertheless, the existing international human rights framework on the right to work faces limitations to adequately draw attention to and capture the specificity of older persons' experiences. As noted in the OHC HR update to the 2012 Analytical Outcome Study, which is a working paper to this group, the right to work is constructed around a model of life that does not reflect the longer period of life after the traditional retirement age. It rightly concludes that a fundamental rethink is required around the current understanding of the right to work for older persons. This is all the more important considering the lived experiences of older persons on the labor market. The working paper prepared by DESA indicates that age discrimination is overwhelmingly identified as a key challenge faced by older persons at all stages of the employment process. Older persons are confronted with discriminatory treatment in recruitment, employment terms and conditions, inadequately or inexistent accessibility conditions, lack of training, promotion opportunities, and pressure to retire. Such discriminatory treatment is grounded in negative stereotypes, perceiving older persons as having a limited ability to learn new skills and decreased productivity. For example, older persons are not offered and encouraged to undertake education and training activities, which in turn limits their access to fast evolving labor markets that highly value new and digital technologies. Older persons are also more likely to be in the precarious or short-term working arrangements, including in the informal sector. Mandatory retirement ages are another challenge to the full realization of the right to work of older persons. Other factors, such as gender, exacerbated ageism and age discrimination in the workplace. Older women often work in precarious and informal roles, which are paid less and are connected to unsafe conditions and difficulties in access to social protection. Ageism and age discrimination experienced by older persons at work and in accessing the labor market have very concrete impacts, including on adequate standards of living, social inclusion, and independent living. These are among the most important concerns for older persons worldwide, as outlined in the new WHO Global Study on Ageism, as well as made evident through the COVID-19 pandemic. To conclude, it is important to reiterate that older persons, like everyone else, have the right to equal opportunity and treatment with respect to all aspects of work. To achieve a full realization of the right to work of older persons, states need to take measures to ensure equality and non-discrimination, and to promote access to the labor market and to future education opportunities. This needs to go in parallel with a shift from the all too common narrative focusing on economic concerns over aging to a narrative recognizing the important economic and other contributions that many older persons make. And as noted earlier, a fundamental rethink is needed around the understanding how the existing international human rights framework on the right to work captures and applies the realities lived by older persons today. I hope that this provides some thoughts for discussion, and I look forward to observations from different stakeholders. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Mahler, for this first presentation. Without further ado, I'd like to now give the floor to Mrs. Astrid Dentler. She is a member of Cabinet of Vice President Dubravka Šuica of the European Commission. Here we are. Mrs. Dentler, your work focused on demography, aging, economic and social policies. You've also worked for the European Parliament in various capacities, and you served previously as an advisor to members of the European Parliament. So it's wonderful to have you here with us. Thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is now yours, please.
Thank you very much, Ms. Andres, for this very kind introduction. And dear Madam Chair, dear distinguished co-panelists and excellencies, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, to all participants. First of all, let me thank you for the invitation to the European Commission to participate in today's panel discussion. It's a great pleasure to address you today as part of this 11th session of the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. And I would like to use the next couple of minutes to present to you the most recent work of the European Commission in the area of aging, namely the Green Paper on Aging, but also some aspects of the European Pillar of Social Rights. And with this, I will also address a few labour market-related issues. So with the start of the new mandate of the European Commission in 2019, the work on aging has really gained new momentum. And this is because we have now, for the first time ever, a Vice President's portfolio dedicated to demography. And with this, Vice President Dubravka Šuica, whom you've already just mentioned, has taken on the task on looking more closely and addressing the challenges and opportunities of a demographic change, and of course, including aging. And for the Vice President, and it is very important to maintain this balance of challenges and opportunities that I've just mentioned in all aspects of our policy making. So as a point of departure for the work on demography, the European Commission adopted last year a report on the impact of demographic change in the European Union. And this report identified longer life expectancy at birth as a major development within the Union. And in fact, over the last 5 decades, so the last 50 years, Europeans have gained 10 years in life expectancy. And living longer in better health is one of the greatest achievements in this regard. So undoubtedly, aging is the demographic megatrend of the EU. And against this analytical background, we came forward with a Green Paper on Aging at the end of January earlier this year. And so just in brackets, the Green Paper is a document with which the European Commission launches a debate and public consultation on an issue that we consider of importance at European level. And so we invite stakeholders and citizens to participate in this process and respond to specific questions that we raise now on the topic of aging. So what is the starting point of the Green Paper on Aging? Well, first of all, I should say what it's not. It's not a Green Paper on older persons. It's on aging. So we're given the multidimensional and universal impacts of aging, we approach aging from a life cycle perspective. And indeed, as I mentioned, we look at both the challenges and opportunities of aging for individuals and also society in different stages of our life. And these we group namely into four broad phases. So let me start with the first of the four groups, these or stages in life, rather, I should say. These are first the young formative years, so the years where we lay the foundations, namely for lifelong learning and acquisition of skills, as well as active and healthy aging, which needs to be adopted as an approach early in life. The second stage in life that we're looking at is that of working age. And here we look at labor market participation, but also issues such as productivity, innovation, and business opportunities, and including senior entrepreneurship and the way we can better integrate older workers in the labor market. The third phase that we're looking at is retirement. And also in this stage of life, many persons are luckily often still fit and active, and undertake societal and economic participation, for example, in the form of volunteering, which plays an important role. But we're likewise discussing for this stage in life the adequacy and fairness and sustainability of pension systems, which need to be discussed. And then finally, we come to the fourth of the four groups, and this is the phase where in life where persons have growing needs, and where especially the health and long-term care needs are a central element of the debate, which we consider deserve reflection in the EU. And I would also like to mention that there are specific reflections in the Green Paper on specifically the autonomy, participation, and rights of older people. Now, this reflection and debate process that we've launched in January is not intended to stand isolated. Actually, it forms part of a number of interlinked initiatives, and I would like to highlight the connections between the Green Paper and the European Pillar of Social Rights, of which you might have heard as well. And so several principles of the European Pillar of Social Rights relate directly or indirectly to aging or older persons. So to name just a few, the principles on old age income and pensions, on long-term care, on healthcare, inclusion of people with disabilities, work-life balance, and of course, education, training, and lifelong learning. Now, as the effects of the current pandemic that we're in will start to hopefully abate, we need to implement policies and measures to a fair, inclusive, and sustainable recovery. And so the recently adopted action plan on the European Pillar of Social Rights embeds progress on jobs and social rights in our recovery strategy and strengthens the social dimension across all policies of the EU. And in particular, the action plan points to active labor market policies and employment services to adapt working environments, it's been mentioned before and as well, ensure adequate working conditions, tackle labor market segmentation, ensure equality, inclusive education. There's an emphasis on promoting skilling, upskilling, reskilling, boosting the employability, and guarantee, of course, gender equality through equal wages and equal opportunities. Importantly, it also points to improving the well-being of older persons, allowing for dignified living conditions, providing essential services such as health and long-term care that I've just mentioned. But let me come back very briefly on the aspect of labor market policies. Part of these active labor market policies that we see as an important element in the recovery is also taking into account the upskilling and that upskilling and reskilling can actually facilitate flexible career pathways for working professionals, including older people. This is very important. And this is actually a theme that is also present in the Green Paper on Aging, where we specifically discuss the needs to adapt working conditions, including occupational health and safety, to the needs of older workers. And in the context of the EU, this is particularly important, given the fact that older workers those aged between 55 and 64 are a growing force in the labor market. And so basically, just to name some figures, in 2010, 44.7% of them were in employment, while today we stand at 59.1%. So while these numbers indicate an important progress, of course, there's always the need and the possibility to improve. And so we look actually very much forward to the contributions that we will receive over the remaining weeks of this public consultation on aging. And then we will deliberate and work on the concrete follow-up measures. So with this short introduction to the current work on the European Commission on Aging, we'll stop and look forward to the discussion. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Dentler, for this presentation. I think we got a very good understanding now of policy options, the importance of skilling, which of course also requires targeted policy. So thank you so much. Let me now introduce our next speaker, Mrs. Liat Ayalon. She, as we already heard, she is a very distinguished researcher from the School of Social Work at the Bar Ilan University. Yes, here we are, of Israel. And Mrs. Ayalon coordinates international research networks on the topic of ageism, among this an EU-funded PhD program on the topic of ageism. And as I said, has already a very distinguished research career, and is also consulting national and international organizations concerning the development and evaluation of programs and services for older adults. Mrs. Ayalon, it's a pleasure having you here. The floor is yours, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I will be talking about the right to work and access to the labor market. I'm going to start off by stressing the fact that the right to work is a human right that should be granted to each and every one of us, unrelated to our chronological age. We all have the right to stay in the workforce, the right to re-enter the workforce, and the right for training and learning. Moreover, some people simply must work. Low middle income countries often do not have a pension system in place. Moreover, women with interrupted career trajectories and low-paid workers are forced to stay in the workforce for longer years, simply because they don't have the support to stop working. The benefits associated with continued work are numerous to the individual, but even more so to society. Research has shown that intergenerational contact reduces ageist stereotypes. Hence, it is highly likely that age-diverse work environments are one way to combat ageism. Nonetheless, if you look at the statistics, you see that most older people are not in the workforce. Many of them, however, provide informal work in the form of caregiving, which is unrewarded, no pension or career advancement attached, and no acknowledgement. I will argue here that the barriers for keeping older people in the workforce are either in the form of stigma and stereotypes or in the form of discrimination. We are all aware of the term, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Moreover, there are stereotypes about older people as being less healthy, less trusting, more vulnerable to work-family interruptions. A recent systematic review, however, has refuted most of these stereotypes. In addition, there is this thought that older people should give the right of the way to younger people. And if older people do not move away from the workforce, they will block the entrance of younger people into the workforce. However, research has shown that in those countries where there is high employment rate of older people, there is also high employment rate of younger people, and vice versa. The problem with these stereotypes is that they become self-fulfilling. Older people internalize them and operate accordingly. Moreover, older people are subject to discrimination, which prevents them from participating in the workforce. Discrimination occurs at multiple levels. At the organizational level, we see discrimination in advertisement for the job, asking for applicants to a young and dynamic firm. In hiring, there is research that has shown over and over a preference towards younger people, even when the older and younger people were comparable in skills and education. Moreover, older people are the first to be laid off from their job and are less likely to be sent off for training. However, discrimination does not end here. It also exists at the international and national level. The Court of Justice of the EU allows differential treatment based on age in the field of employment if reasonably justified. I will argue here that there is no reasonable justification for discrimination. Moreover, multiple countries employ mandatory retirement age, which simply states that after a certain age, you should give your skills, abilities, and education for free, simply because you have reached that age, and the emphasis here is on mandatory. During the pandemic, we've seen multiple incidents using chronological age for differential lockdown, exit, and return to work strategies. These measures are discriminatory and convey the message to older people and to society at large that older people are not part of the social fabric of our society. The good thing is that we can do better. Research has shown that at the organizational level, providing age inclusive management, opportunity for lifelong learning, and training how to counter age related stereotypes is effective. Moreover, at the country level, countries that have employed a comprehensive approach that targets the general public, workers, and employers by providing anti discrimination legislations, incentives that encourage workers to stay in the workforce for longer periods of time, educational interventions that foster a positive image of older people, and promotion of part-time employment to allow for better work-family balance, these countries have been successful in prolonging the stay of older people in the workforce. Last, we need a convention for the rights of older people. Such a convention will provide a normative framework and global standards. A UN Convention for the Rights of Older People will provide an explicit framework which points to human rights violations and discrimination of older people. The right to work should not be based on chronological age, and mandatory, and again the emphasis is on mandatory, retirement age should be abolished. I'm calling my country, Israel, as well as all countries, to adopt a UN convention, which will allow us to move away from this very ageist, anachronistic life course, which divides our life based on chronological age, to a life course that allows us to enter and exit the workforce in order to have better family work balance and to continue our training and education throughout our life. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation and very passionate plea for stronger international law. I'm sure we will hear more about this proposal in the discussion. But before we come to the interactive part of this meeting today, it is my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Chris Gardner as our final panelist. He's the founder and CEO of the Christopher P. Gardner Foundation and is also ranked as the 5th most popular motivational speaker in the world. Those of you who are into movies, you may know that his best-selling memoir, The Pursuit of Happiness, was the basis of the award-winning film starring Will Smith. There's much more that can be said about Chris Gardner, but of course you can find all of this in the internet. And more importantly, I'd like to not to take the time away from his presentation. I don't see him on the screen currently. I hope he's connected. Can we see Mr. Gardner? Here he is. Wonderful.
Hello.
We can hear you and we can see you. The floor is yours, please.
First of all, I am Chris Gardner, and I am a 67-year-old startup Before I elaborate on all of that, I must say it is indeed the highest of honors to be with all of you today, even with this being a global village gathering due to the pandemic. The parts of my life that you saw depicted in the film, The Pursuit of Happiness, all happened here in America. But where they happened doesn't matter, because I believe that the most challenging, important, and empowering experiences in all of our lives are the universal experiences. The birth of a child, a graduation, a wedding, a new job or business opportunity, a new home, the loss of a loved one. Those are the universal experiences that create what my dear friend Dr. Maya Angelou once referred to as a family called humanity. And I will submit to you that during those most important, challenging, and empowering experiences, where you are on the planet is secondary to where you are in your spirit. Those experiences that I just referenced, they probably all feel the same, whether you live in America, Africa, or Asia, whether you live in Shanghai, Sharjah, or Chicago. Prior to preparing my brief comments today, I reflected back on the last major speaking engagement that I did here in America. It was February 12th, 2020. The venue was the United Nations. COVID-19 was already here. We didn't even know its name. I'll never forget the sense of being overwhelmed as I began to pass through the multiple levels of security at UN Plaza. The sense of being overwhelmed, anxious, and tight immediately dissipated, and dissolved the second I walked through the front doors at the UN and I was met by a life-size statue of President Nelson Mandela. And there he stood, Madiba, tall, strong, a smile on his face with his hand extended in friendship. And I knew that I was home at this place, this global village called the United Nations. In preparing my remarks for you today, I reflected back on my last meeting with Madiba. What was supposed to be a 15-minute courtesy call turned into an hour-long, broad-ranging conversation. Just he and I sitting on the couch talking. And I will never forget him saying to me that the role of the entrepreneur is to turn visions into reality. Madiba, for me, is the ultimate social entrepreneur. Using that definition, at 76 years of age, Mr. Mandela became the oldest president ever elected in the history of South Africa. He turned his vision into a reality. So as you all begin to consider, dissect, and debate the question of entrepreneurship and education at any age, let me ask you a question. How old is too old? Being an entrepreneur, again, is not just about being a brash young person that wants to, in the words of one famous American entrepreneur, move fast and break things. Again, using Madiba's definition, it can take decades to turn a vision into reality. Just a few examples. Anybody know this guy? No? I bet you've been to his restaurant. He started that business when he was 56 years of age. Recognize this gentleman? No? It doesn't matter. I bet you consumed his product. He created that product at 58 years of age. Everybody knows this guy. What you don't know is he did not sell his first piece of chicken until he was 62 years old. My favorite in this group of seniors is this man. This gentleman dropped out of high school at 17 years of age to join the U.S. military and fight in the Korean War. But on this day right here, at 87 years of age, he is receiving his high school diploma. Did you see how he just popped out of that chair? So my question again is, how old is too
That's
old?
what it is. You gotta be kidding me.
Your role
No, sir, we are not kidding you.
as world leaders, as social entrepreneurs, is to work to create a global village for equal access to resources. Make it possible
I hoped it was.
for all members
Wow.
of this family.
Oh, crap.
And it's not an honorary either. It's
There's an overlap between the speaker and the video. Now it's more clear.
Orders. Until I can be with all of you again in person, I wish you peace, power, and prayers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gardner, for these inspirational words. And they have now brought us to the end of our panel. And we can now open the interactive discussion. We have heard about the international human rights law. We have heard about policy choices. And we have heard about really inspirational careers that we just saw on the screen. So let me now open the interactive discussion. We have already a long list of speakers. And I will just share a few pieces of information again for you to know for the intervention. So first of all, I encourage you to keep your interventions short. Please do refrain from reading a statement if you can. The time limits are 3 minutes for the national statements and 5 minutes for statements on behalf of a group of states. And the same time limit of 3 minutes applies to statements by national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. Again, if you wish to take the floor, please do inscribe by clicking on the link to the inscription form. And the Secretariat will then post the link in the chat box. I would like to remind delegations that you won't be able to unmute your microphones or engage your videos unless you are given the floor. And when you are called to speak, you will receive a message saying that your streaming has been approved. So then, as I said, please press the video that will appear there. All right, so let me now start to give the floor to the representative of the National Human Rights Institution of the Philippines, Marizin Santos. Can we see her on the screen?
Hello?
Yes, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Good evening from Manila. Thank you very much to the chair, the moderator, and the panelists. The Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines is grateful to participate in this discussion. My question to the panelists is, knowing that labor rights are human rights, how can an international treaty on the rights of older persons ensure they have the right to work, including the right to the enjoyment of just and favorable conditions of work, and the right to social security, and that they should enjoy these rights on an equal basis with others? In consultations and research conducted by our commission, older persons wish to continue working because being able to work...
I'm sorry, madam. We seem to have a technical problem. So we just want to check because there is no interpretation.
I see. Yeah, it happened yesterday, but it's fine. Maybe I can post that question to the panelists about the international treaty that has also been mentioned by the previous speakers.
Okay, very good. So I will then just repeat the question so that it can be interpreted.
Sure.
Okay, otherwise we can also bring you back in.
I don't want to take the other's time. It's fine. But yes, if you can help me relate to the interpreters about our question on the international treaty, ensuring that older persons have the right to work, including this in case we move forward for the drafting, and the right to enjoyment of just and favorable conditions at work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam. And I will just repeat the question to our panelists. So the question is, in relation to the international treaty, if the drafting goes ahead, how could it be assured that there is a right to work under favorable conditions, and also a right to social security in this treaty? Very good. We will come back to this question. I will take a few more interventions from the floor before giving the floor to the panelists. So please do stay with us. So I'm now inviting the NGO International Federation of the Association of the Elderly. Can we give the floor to, I think, the Maud Bruce?
Yes, that's it. Maud Bruce About.
I'm sorry.
No problem. The International Federation of the Associations of the Elderly, thank you for this opportunity to participate and call for the drafting of an international convention to protect the rights of older persons. Aging with rights will benefit all today and tomorrow and support the 2030 agenda. Inputs to this meeting indicate strong agreement around the challenges that older persons face in the working market. The mismatch between a person's needs, let's call them human rights as they are, and attractiveness, making it difficult to earn decent wages when pension is lacking or is insufficient, to stay employed until mandatory retirement age, or even to stay active for one's own enjoyment. There is ageism and age discrimination at all stages. I don't think I need to elaborate much, but it's, let's say, in the European Union, there is a framework. Still, we have data from Belgium showing that age discrimination starts with recruiters from the age of 45. In Europe, we're asked to work longer, yet older workers are being pushed out into retirement once they reach sectorial age ceilings set by employers and unions. And the working conditions are being adapted for disabled workers, but not for older workers that have functional limitations, because they have been working in hard professions. Today, we cannot quantify the effects of the ongoing pandemic on the job market. Still, we know from the inputs of France that the number of job seekers aged 55 and over increased by around 180% with the 2008 crisis. We welcome the European Union addressing many issues, but our organization still fears that the current pandemic will worsen the situation of older workers, deprive them of rights to and in the labor market, and exclude them socially and economically. I asked the same question as the previous speaker. How can this working group advance in this field of human rights towards a draft of the convention? Thanks a lot for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for this intervention, and again, here an important question related to the issues that should be in such a convention. Perhaps just a quick comment on the job losses during the pandemic. The ILO has recently estimated that more than 250 million jobs are lost due to COVID-19, and indeed the crisis has had a disproportionate impact on certain groups of people including elderly people. So now let me, without again further ado, let me give the floor to our next speaker. It is the representative of Mexico, Mrs. Ana Luisa Gambel, if that's correct. Mexico, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Buenos días.
Good morning. Thank you, Moderator. I'd like to come back to the issue of the Convention in Article 18 with regard to the right to work and dignified work for older persons. And coming back to something Claudia Marley said, in this search for spaces for older persons, to see them recognized for their knowledge. And also Astrid Dentler mentioned the greater life expectancy because of expectancy of better health. This is a great achievement of humankind. Sometimes it's seen as a problem, as a disaster, but it's really something that we need to fight for. And this is really where we need the working group to try and make changes in this regard. Mexico, at the National Institute for Older Persons, we have a model that we've been implementing for very many years, and it's through conventions with business to train the CEOs of these companies and government institutions to employ older persons and recognize their experience and their knowledge. And in very many cases, it's been seen that this gives greater stability in very many areas. Obviously, they don't want to compete with their other age groups, but certainly it's been seen that older persons do have their place, and certainly more work can be done to bring on board older persons and ensure that they can have proper pay, whether that's by projects or by the hour. And our system has met with wide acceptance in very many diverse situations in the country. Of course, the pandemic has affected this. A lot of people have lost their employment, but we have to try and help them. We are speeding up our vaccination program for older persons in Mexico, and I would conclude by saying that these businesses don't see what they're doing as a favor to older persons, as a privilege that they're granting to them. They see those older persons as making a great contribution. And that's very important that we make that point. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Wall of business. I would now like to invite the representative of the NGO Age Platform Europe, Philippe Seidel-Leroy. Can we have you on the screen? Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all the contributions, and thank you especially to the panelists. The right to work is an important enabler of other rights, income, health, pensions, but it is also a driver for social inclusion and exchange between generations. Yet there are barriers to exercise this right for older persons, and this was shown in the UN DESA paper and the OHCHR study, which links to other rights. This unfortunately also includes the European Union, as outlined by FIAPA, and this is despite the existence of anti-discrimination legislation. There are about 2 in 5 older workers who are not in employment, and the gender gaps in employment, income, and poverty are highest in the age group just before retirement age. Women still have to retire earlier than men in several EU member states. There's ageist interpretations of the law. Courts find the existence of a pension entitlement sufficient for employers to just terminate workers' contracts based on their age. Older persons are pushed out of employment by legislation, such as mandatory retirement, and by attitudes and stereotypes. In France, large employers are just currently offering redundancy packages to workers just under 60 to downsize their own workforce. In the UK, only 1 out of 4 persons losing their job over 50 is expected to ever work again. 1 in 5 older persons in the EU is caring for a family member, and they struggle to reconcile work with care. And finally, it has also been mentioned, impairments related to age are often not seen as a disability, and they don't give rise to reasonable accommodation. So this shows how intertwined the right to work is with other rights, such as lifelong learning or long-term care. For us, a convention on the rights of older persons would ensure that public policies would effectively combat ageism in all areas, and it would make clear that older persons have the same right to work as anyone else. Allowing older persons to remain working for as long as they wish bears an important message that everyone is still wanted and needed, and that all persons are drivers and contributors to society. I have 2 questions, actually. One is to Ms. Dentler. So how would enforcing a right to long-term care and autonomy, as exists in the European Pillar of Social Rights, reinforce the right to access to the labor market? And a second one to Ms. Ayalon on more the images. How would to guarantee the right to work the change perceptions of aging and reduce ageism? Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for your interventions and for your questions. We will come back to the panelists in a moment. I will take 2 more interventions from the floor, and then I will maybe pause and give the panelists a chance to respond to the many questions that have already been raised. So now let me please give the floor to the representative of the National Human Rights Institute of Germany, Peter Litzke. Mr. Litzke, can you hear us? The floor is yours.
Yes, hello. Can you hear and see me?
We can hear and see you very well, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Greetings from Berlin, Germany. It's a lovely sunny afternoon here. Madam Chair, experts, delegates and participants, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to speak at this important part of the session. I am presenting on behalf of the German Institute for Human Rights, the National Human Rights Institution of Germany. By ratifying several international human rights conventions, for example, CESCR, CEDAW, and CRPD, Germany has committed itself to protect and to promote the right of older persons to work and to guarantee non-discriminatory access to the labor market. And according to the German General Equal Treatment Act, which came into force in 2006, no one may be discriminated against because of their age. However, the Act does not cover all areas of life for older persons. Let me give you 2 examples for discrimination in Germany based on age regarding the right to work. In terms of the right to work of older persons, one of the challenges in Germany is this discrimination against older persons in accessing the labor market, as reported in the presented working document by DISA for today's focus area. According to a survey conducted by the Federal Anti-Discrimination Agency, older people frequently report discrimination in searching and applying for jobs. Because of this, many older persons feel materially disadvantages as well as social humiliation when they do not get a job as a result of discrimination reasons. Another study by the agency showed that job advertisements discriminate against older persons in many cases, as the professor told us before in her presentation. In employment, older persons in Germany may experience discrimination in terms of pay. Due to prejudices and stereotypes, older persons, as well as younger people, are assumed to have fewer skills, and this can have a negative impact on the evaluation of their performance or their salary classification. This phenomenon can be observed worldwide, as shown in the recently published WHO Global Report on Ageism. Let me finish the last point The right to work, which is enshrined in many treaties, is not specific enough to guarantee the full enjoyment of this right and the equal access to the labor market for older persons. Therefore, I would like to encourage you all once again to start working on a comprehensive, integral, binding international human rights treaty, which would serve the purpose of the protection of the human rights of older persons best. And I would like to join the previous speakers in asking how an international convention for older persons can strengthen the right to work for older persons. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention, and may the 4th be with you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Peter Litzke from Germany. So again, a question on the convention. We will come back to this, but now I'd like to give the floor to the representative of Argentina, Mario Aguilera. Can you hear us? Please, the floor is yours. Argentina, here we are, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Can you hear me? Good morning to everyone. I'd like to thank you for being able to participate in this debate. And I'm very happy to be speaking on this very important item. We are convinced that the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us the importance of policies to protect the rights of older persons. And we see that some countries have been able to increase protection, particularly during the difficult pandemic period, and other countries perhaps haven't been able to do that in the same way. Because of reasons that the experts have mentioned today and yesterday. For example, there's been greater investment in some countries in care policies. Also, there's been fairer access to the COVID-19 vaccine, but fundamentally, there have been instruments, human rights instruments, that have given priority to these kinds of protections. The Inter-American Convention on the rights of on human rights and the rights of older persons establishes that states parties will adopt the measures necessary to promote employment of older persons and guarantee adequate social coverage, even for non-remunerated work, as well as improving their access to the labour market. In my country, with regard to the access to the labour market, it's governed by the Inter-American Convention and Article 18, as I mentioned just previously. And many other rights are covered by this. This has been a priority for us in the decisions that we have made. This isn't just the policy of the government, but it's because we have this Inter-American Convention that sets these priorities for governments. And that's why we would encourage states to work to prepare a binding universal legal instrument that will enable us to safeguard the rights and freedoms of older persons throughout the world in order to create fairer and more just societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the representative of Argentina. I will take two more government representatives, United Kingdom followed by Canada. So if I can invite the representative of the United Kingdom, Megan White, to please take the floor.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. The United Kingdom would like to thank the panelists for their insights today. We welcome the opportunity to engage on this important issue and would like to share some reflections from our own domestic practice, building on our earlier written submissions. Madam Chair, the UK has introduced a number of legislative and policy measures that will ensure that older persons are able to maintain access to the labor market. In 2011, we removed the default retirement age, which means that most people in the UK can choose when to retire. Employers are only able to set a fixed retirement age if it can be objectively justified in their particular circumstances. We recognize that access to flexible working practices, such as remote working, flexi time, and compressed hours, are key to helping older persons stay in the labor market. As a result, in 2014, we extended the right to request flexible working to all employees with 26 weeks continuous service with their employer. We estimate that over 20 million employees and 97% of employers offer some form of flexible working. The UK recognizes that older people can face challenges and when accessing the labor market. They experience issues such as age discrimination, with their experience and knowledge overlooked by potential employers, as well as negative impacts of adult caring responsibilities, with older women particularly affected. We are committed to providing targeted Job Center Plus support so that everyone, including older persons, are able to return to work. To support those who have taken time out of employment for caring responsibilities and want to return to paid work, the Government Equalities Office have launched 25 returner programs across the private and public sector. Finally, we recognize age as a protected characteristic under the Equality Act of 2010 and similar provisions in the developed nations. The Act provides protection against direct and indirect age discrimination and gives a legal remedy for older persons who believe that they have been discriminated against. Madam Chair, we would welcome the panel's views on how best governments can work with businesses to ensure that benefits of employing older persons are recognized. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the representative of the UK. And I will now invite Canada, please, to take the floor. Jackie Holden, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panelists for the very interesting presentations today. We welcome the opportunity to speak to you briefly on this important issue. Canada recognizes that the right to work and access to the labor market is important for healthy aging, and that it greatly contributes to older persons' quality of life and ability to remain active and engaged in their communities. Much has been accomplished in Canada to promote longer working lives and the gradual transition from employment to retirement. However, Canada acknowledges that barriers still exist for older Canadians, such as ageism in the workplace. And as such, we're taking action to support the access of older persons to the labor market. Madam Chair, we'd welcome the panel's views on the question, the following question. Should interventions be targeted primarily at employers with respect to addressing ageism in the workplace? Or is there a need to address ageism at a broader level too, to make sure that older workers are and feel truly valued? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the representative of Canada. And again, a very important question here related to the employers and businesses in relation to the convention. So I'd like to now give the panelists a chance to respond to the many questions that were asked. There are more speakers on the speakers list. Please bear with me. I will then turn to you. But at this point, I'd like to invite the panelists come in, and perhaps we could start with Mrs. Dentler and Mrs. Ireland with the specific questions that were asked to you. And if I may just summarize, we had several questions that related to the issue of the right to employment and social protection, how this should be covered under this treaty, how stereotyping and discrimination should be addressed, and what would be the role of businesses and employers. So if I may ask perhaps Mrs. Dentler, if you could come in first, and then I will also give the floor to the other panelists. If you would like to comment on some of those questions.
Yes, thank you very much indeed for giving me the floor again. And a big thank you as well to all the interventions and the representatives that have spoken. It's been highly interesting and informative to get those different views. And in fact, I'd like to come back to what one of the speakers said, and this was, apologies if I'm not paraphrasing now correctly, the representative was saying, well, older peoples have their place and their role in society, and this is certainly something that needs to be underlined. And just pinpointing to the Green Paper on Aging, something I didn't mention beforehand, but in fact the subtitle of this very Green Paper is Fostering Solidarity and Responsibility Between Generations. So it is very clear that intergenerational relations play an enormous role. And having said that, it's clear that age-related discrimination has no place in that. And in fact, the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union provides for the prohibition of discrimination based on age. So I think there's no doubt about that. I'd like to come back to a couple of elements that I mentioned earlier, which is rooted particularly in the European Pillar of Social Rights, because there were a number of questions related to realizing the right to old age income, pension, healthcare, and work-life balance. And in fact, I think the European Pillar of Social Rights is an important tool here for us in the European Union. And another element is one where I'd like to link it to another question, work-life balance. One of the speakers also mentioned that and also asked about the links between long-term care and access possibility to work. And certainly one of the keys lies in work-life balance. And there at European Union level, we have adopted legislation which is currently in its implementation phase, but where we are particularly looking at enabling carers leave, which should be especially in situations where there is informal care or difficult situations, then to combine work and care responsibilities help here. And I would also like to say that we're looking into encouraging also member states to develop mixes of informal and formal cares, and of course one of the key elements is always the quality of care as well, but this can be ensured and that there's a good mix. With regard to the convention, well, there we are carefully listening to the member states of the European Union and seeing how the discussion is led between them. When it comes to retirement ages, this is not something that we decided at EU level. We looked at certainly we looked though at the topic of promoting longer working lives, also in the context of the Green Paper. So we're actually at this stage very much hoping for input on all those topics. And perhaps with regard to the employers or business sides, this is addressing those issues is not something that can be done on a single way or a single street. There need to be all the players on board, and certainly when it comes to businesses, there is obviously from the side of older workers also an enormous benefit in terms of, for example, life experience that such workers bring, and that deserves definitely recognition and is certainly also a valuable asset to businesses. So I think it is also about understanding and recognizing this value. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Many thanks for these reflections. Mrs. Ayalon, would you like to come in at this point to respond to the specific questions that were asked, and also the broader questions related to the treaty? Yeah.
For the opportunity to respond.
No problem. Always takes a moment. Please go ahead.
Sure. So in relation to the ability of states to tackle ageism, I would say that the WHO report on ageism, which actually was launched a couple of weeks ago, states that there are a couple of ways that we can take in order to combat ageism. One is through education and awareness, And many of the stereotypes that I outlined earlier in my talk actually are so ingrained in each and every one of us that we don't even stop to question them. We accept them as truth. Hence, we really need to provide people with more information and increase people's awareness of these and eventually refute these stereotypes. And this is one way that can be effective, but it really has to be at the global level, I think at the national level, so that the entire public is aware of that. Intergenerational contact is another way that has shown to be effective in reducing ageism. Hence, I believe that the more older people are in the workforce and the more role models older people have, the more likely they are to break the barriers and rejoin or stay in the workforce longer. And finally, I think that we need legal interventions and legal binding documents that really would dictate to all of us and explicitly states what we can and cannot do, and also will point to instances of discriminations. I think that the legally binding documents also provide, in addition to the fact that they tell us what we should and should not do, they also provide a normative framework that eventually penetrates our mindset and help us operate accordingly. So I think that really we need a comprehensive approach if we want to tackle ageism and allow workers to stay in the workforce longer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gardner, I'd like to bring you in on this discussion again, the role of business and employers. As an entrepreneur yourself, what is the role of businesses and employers to prevent stereotyping and discrimination? Would you have any thoughts quickly that you could share with us on this question? Okay, we may have maybe a connection problem. Then let me just turn to Mrs. Mahler. Would you have some reflections on the questions that were raised in relation to the international treaty?
Thank you for giving me the floor again. Yes, I do have a couple of ideas about an international treaty, and some of them have already been spelled out. A new treaty would also need to focus on how can we combat ageism, because this, as already said, is really rooted in all our minds. And we also have to keep in mind that age is still not a ground of discrimination in the other treaties. It's just under other status. And so nobody really focuses on age discrimination in this regard. So if we would go further in drafting a treaty, it would need to focus on the specificity of older persons in regard of access to the labor market and the right to work, and spell it out quite clearly, because this would be the basis for better implementation on the national level and regional and national level. And as said in my statement, we also need to keep in mind that there is an interrelation between social security and access to work, because this is the access to work and the right to work is a precondition to get social security in many countries, and therefore we need to check exactly how this is related and how can we move forward to make this a reality for everybody. I would also like to answer the question on business and older persons. Thank you for raising this, and also I would like to thank Mexico for telling us that they already have some kind of partnership in business and give them some incentives. And therefore, I would also like to raise once again the awareness on the analytical update paper of the OHCHR, who already spells out a couple of recommendations in this regard. So we need to make it more specific, and we need to give them more support, or give older persons more support. It would also be good to have digital inclusion and training programs, and the online job matching services should be increased. And for example, what also is mentioned in the DESA background paper is that monetary incentives to employers hire and retain older workers is mentioned by a couple of states. Something I would also like to mention in this regard, that we also should keep in mind that we already have some focus on business and human rights. And in this regard, it would be good to include all the workers in this discussion and move on. Also the intersectionality, because as spelled out by many others already, is that all the women, for example, face bigger difficulties. I think you already mentioned this from the ILO perspectives, that it's harder for them to enjoy their human right on the right to work. So this also needs to be taken into account when we are working on an article on the right to work for all the persons. In regard of the question of Canada, I would say we always need to address the broader society and give also incentives to the employers, why they should introduce more specific entry points for all the workers. Thank you for giving me the floor again.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mahler. I will now continue with the speakers list, and we have an NGO representative now from the Older Women's Network Europe, Renée Laviera. Can we please give the floor to the NGO representative? And if you want to take the floor, please remember that you need to describe.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay. Please go ahead.
Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this thought-provoking panel. We wish to share our views with you all. Everyone has the right to work. However, this right is not being enjoyed by all equally. Employers often have negative attitudes towards older workers, with age discrimination persisting, even though older women and men are not necessarily less healthy, less educated, less skillful, or less productive than their younger counterparts. Stereotyping and prejudice that are not recognized and thus not challenged in today's digital world may result in generational segregation, naturalizing youth as digitally adept and the old as digitally incompetent. Stereotypes about older persons often intersect with gender stereotypes, making discrimination in the labor market particularly severe for older women. This is developing in a context where research has shown that a diverse workplace allows for more ideas and processes. In fact, a 2020 OECD study found that investing in multi-generational workforces will raise GDP per capita by almost 19% in 3 decades. Legal barriers and disincentives to the employment of older persons should be removed. Moreover, it should be recognized that the increasing older woman's shouldering of care responsibilities for the grandchildren and dependent relatives constitutes a barrier to being active in the labor market. Flexibility at the workplace, together with remote working, should continue to be developed and made available to all workers, ensuring that care responsibilities are shouldered by both men and women. Part-time work is another option for all workers to develop a work-life balance. The gender pay gap needs to be addressed in a context of transparency, as this results in the gender pension gap with women that suffer discrimination or lack of flexibility at the workplace at a younger age, ending up at risk of poverty as they grow older and more dependent than their male counterparts. In 2018, women in the European Union, aged over 65, received a pension that was on average 30% lower than that of men. Affordable lifelong education and upskilling of workers' abilities have become vital for all ages, and particularly in an ever-changing digitalized world. I join the call Older Women's Network Europe urges the development of an international legal framework to ensure that it promotes and protects the rights and dignity of older persons in all sectors of society in the shortest time frame possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the NGO representative, and really thank you also for highlighting the gender dimensions, which is a very important focus of this discussion. I would now like to give the floor to the next speaker on the list, and please, if you do want to request the floor, you can inscribe by clicking on the link to the inscription form. The next speaker will be the NGO representative, So Optimist International, Betty Levy. Can we please give the floor to the NGO representative?
Morning. So Optimist International recognizes that the working document provides guidance for the realization of human right of older persons to work. There is legislation in many countries to protect discrimination on the grounds of age. However, for older persons, age-based discrimination in the formal and informal labor markets is rampant, such as age bias in job announcements, unequal employment terms and conditions, lack of opportunities for promotion, professional development, access to further training and education, and pressure to retire. The right to work and access to the labor market cannot be discussed without consideration of social protection measures. Worldwide, women have suffered a lifetime of discrimination, remain illiterate with no opportunity to attend school, which limits employment opportunities. Without a job, they cannot accumulate savings, receive a pension, or afford health care. A lifetime of no access to economic resources, including credit, work opportunities, land ownership, and inheritance. Many spend most of their lives taking care of others' work that goes unrecognized, end up leaving the labor market or stuck in precarious and low-wage work because of unpaid care responsibilities. What social protection is available to them? ILO estimates that worldwide 57 million older workers are part of the informal economy, primarily because of lack of opportunities in the formal economy or means of livelihood. When there is an absence of sufficient opportunities, inadequate social protection and social dialogue are most pronounced. ILO identified deficits of rights, of social protection, and of representation. With the changing demographics, participation of older workers will significantly increase. We must protect the rights of older workers. We must combat ageism. A convention to protect the rights of older persons will facilitate international recognition and codification of the rights of older persons. It will act as an anti-discriminatory tool to challenge prevailing negative stereotypes about old age. If we are serious about leaving no one behind and ensuring a life of dignity for everybody, an agreement must be reached to move forward with a convention to protect the rights of older persons. So my question is directed to Ms. Mahler and Ms. Ilo. Ms. Mahler, I appreciated you bringing it back to the focus on women, but I'm wondering if you can address that even when women work, there's a pension gap, there's a pay gap, there's lower statutory retirement ages, making it much harder for older women to retire at a time of their choosing. So I'd like to know how we maybe can move past those gaps. And I thank you very much for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much for your important intervention. We will turn to the panelists at the end of this meeting again. But for now, I'd like to first encourage other delegates or representatives, if you wish to take the floor, please do inscribe. And then next, I'd like to give the floor now to the representative of the National Human Rights Institution of Georgia, Tamar Guadamadze. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good evening from Georgia, Madam Vice Chair, dear moderator, dear participants. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address you, and thanks to panelists for their interventions. Before asking them a very specific question, I would like to bring you to your attention to the Georgian context very briefly. Notwithstanding the constitutional framework and the written regulations to support the development and utilization of the employment potential of the elderly, effective actions from the relevant state institutions have not been taken yet. In 2020, the overall unemployment rate in the country was 20%, so the government has not produced separate statistics on the unemployment of the elderly. Whereas in 2019, the unemployment rate among the population aged 65 and older was at 7.6%. Our institution invited the independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons to Georgia to assess the human rights situation of the elderly back in 2018. In the report, independent experts stressed out that the state program focused on improving the qualifications of job seekers neither provides any special assistance nor focuses on the needs of old age job seekers. To ensure access to the labor market, the state developed an online employment portal. According to official data, since 2014 until now, actively on the portal of those seeking a job aged 65 and over was very low. This may be due to the various reasons, such as no access to information, lack of access to digital technologies. In addition, the reason for the low unemployment rate of the elderly may be due to the age discrimination, which is very frequent in our country. Even people in their late 40s are often stereotyped as lacking dynamism, efficiency, and skills. Similar to others, COVID-19 has worsened dramatically the human rights situation in Georgia. The current health crisis has affected negatively the ability of elderly to stay socially connected, to work, and be actively involved in other activities. Moreover, it became a major challenge for the elderly to get familiar with distance working tools, especially in the educational sector. Finally, I would like to mention that any government, and especially our government of Georgia, should acknowledge the existing and potential contributions made by older persons and promote the full enjoyment of human rights by them. In order to achieve these goals, NHRI of Georgia think that it is necessary to start working on a binding international instrument that promotes, protects, and ensures all human rights and fundamental freedoms by older persons. And if I may now, I would like to ask questions to all panelists. What do you think? What kind of specific incentives or elements could be identified in order to promote the employment of elderly, specifically in the countries with a very high rate of general unemployment? And it is not necessary for considering in the future international mechanism, but in general for effectively addressing this problem in the countries similar to us, for example. I thank you Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing the experience perspectives from Georgia. And we will come back to your question. But before, let me now give the floor to to another NGO representative. It's the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. And we have Sylvia Perel-Levin, who I'd like to give the floor. Please, madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. INPEA welcomes this discussion and really looks forward to move forward in the work towards an international binding legal document to protect the rights of older persons. And I want to focus here on the issue of informal workers. 3 out of 4 older persons work in the informal economy, and they are not protected by any legislation or social protection. So one question is, how can informal workers, whether they are working or even domestic workers or older women who are working as informal caregivers, how can they get credit in their pensions, in the contributory pensions for their work. And I just, this is a question and also relates to the mandatory retirement that Liata Yalon referred to. Some countries have abolished, as the UK mentioned earlier, they have abolished. Do we have any data of any change in the employment or retraining of older workers since the abolishment of that mandatory retirement? And to bring to the awareness that the fact that there is a mandatory retirement at, let's say, 65 or 64, already one is unemployable from the age of 60 or even earlier. So how can that be taken into account and to condemn the fact that some countries do have flexible retirement, but in fact they mean flexible retirement for the younger ages, below the age, but always the 64, 65 or other chronological age still is like a cap for the later age. And just my last comment and a call for the member states here that really not forward, not moving means going backwards. So we really need to move forward and adapt to the situation that we are here, we are working, we want to carry on working, or at least we want to be compensated for the informal work that we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your intervention and questions, which brings us now to the end of our speakers list. And before handing over to you, Madam Chair, you've been observing this discussion very attentively, but I would like to just have 5 minutes, if you allow, to allow the panelists to answer to the different questions. So if I may just quickly summarize, we've had an important question related to unemployment and abolishing the mandatory retirement age. What does it mean also in terms of retraining and re-employment? Very important comments also on the gender dimensions and pay gap, which then also translates into a pension gap. How can this be addressed, both through policy as well as law? Participants have also raised the situation of informal sector workers and what can be done to formalize those workers, in particular, for instance, in the care sector. And again, we had comments also on the importance of social protection linked to employment, as well as beyond employment related social protection schemes. So if I may now invite the panelists to come virtually to come back to the floor. And perhaps we can start this time in the reverse order. We'll start with Mrs. Marley first, and then Mrs. Marley, are you here?
Yes, but it always takes a little bit time to get connected.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me focus on the gender dimension, because I think it's so important to raise this issue once again, especially also for older women, and they are very often overlooked. We all know that CEDAW is addressing the pay gap and the pension gap in more or less all their recommendations to states, and also ILO has tackled this issue very often. But I would like to invite you, because one of my next thematic reports will focus on older women, all your ideas and practical engagements, what can be done in this regard, and then we can spell it out and have a meaningful discussion afterwards. So please give me your insights from the ground so we can have more specific discussions in this regard. And I would also like to raise once again that what I have learned through this very fruitful discussion is that we need to change the images of older workers, of older persons in general, but of older workers more specifically, because we need to change the stereotypes and combat the ageism in this regard. We all know that the ageism has very negative effects on the enjoyment of all human rights. It has negative effects on the health And this also relates to the situation of older workers in all our societies. And I will stop here to give the other participants a chance to focus on their questions. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mahler. Can we maybe now have Mrs. Ayalon next on the various questions that we've heard? Again, many of those questions merit in-depth discussion, and there will certainly be a continuation of it. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like also to comment on the gender gap that was discussed here. And I think that this gender gap between men and women does not start in old age, but is lifelong. However, in old age, we notice of that even more so, I think, because of cumulative disadvantages that take place. One way to bridge this gap is by acknowledging the work and contribution of women that occurs outside of the formal workforce. Women are more likely to provide care to both seniors and children. This often is not acknowledged and unrewarded. If countries develop systems that acknowledge the informal contribution of women, what we call reproductive contribution or reproductive labor, then I think that this we will be able to bridge this gap. In terms of the other question about policies that extend working life, I think, as I've already said, I think policies are helpful, but we need more than policies. We need also to target stereotypes and our inner thoughts about what older people can and cannot do and their access to the workforce. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And indeed, international law often sets the scene for policies and vice versa. So I think the two are very complementary. We have again a request to take the floor from the NGO-H Platform Europe. Mr. Seidel-Leroy, you'd like to come in again at this point? Is there maybe an additional comment or question? Okay, we have Mrs. Dentler first. Please go ahead, and then I will go back to the NGO. Please come in.
Okay. As given the streaming possibilities, so, yeah, I will be very brief. And it seems indeed that gender is kind of the dominating topic now of this second round, and certainly can agree with many elements that have been brought forward and been outlined very nicely. How a pay gap later on translates into a pension gap, and very often because women have much more non-linear careers and often lots of caring responsibilities. So basically the key to the solution lies actually also in the labor market and ensuring that women have access to the labor market. But certainly, I mean, you can discuss certain pension credits that could be thinkable. But the one element that I wanted to bring to your attention in particular was with regard to the pay gap and unequal pay. And there at the beginning of this month, I think on the 4th of March, we came forward with a legislative proposal that should enable pay transparency, so that actually the principle of equal pay between for equal work between men and women can be realized through transparency. And I'll stop here.
Many thanks again, Ms. Dentler. This is an interactive discussion, so we have, as I said, still another request for the floor from the NGO platform from the NGO-H Platform Europe. Here we are. Please, you have the floor.
Well, thank you again for giving me the floor again. I had a couple of questions that could be added because we have more time, so it's very nice to raise them. One is an observation, actually. It has been mentioned that we're talking about the right to work, not the obligation to work. So we see that the convention is very, having a holistic convention is very important because it would guarantee the right to social protection and social security. So the right to an adequate pension on one hand, ensuring that older persons are not obliged to carry on working because they have inadequate incomes. So I really want to underline this this holistic approach. Well, there has been a lot of talk about how to, especially address the gender aspect. A particular concern I see is how to reach inactive women. So not only women in a life course perspective, how to encourage women to stay in the labor market, but what about women who have dropped out of the labor market for some time and who want to get back or have now time to get back to the labor market, how to empower them to actually take up, quality jobs with an adequate wages and an adequate working environment. And a second thought is how, if we're discussing a right to work at any age without mandatory retirement, how can we make sure that this is not misunderstood and that there's not an ageist discourse still coming up about older persons taking up space in the labor market? I know this is a fallacy and this is not an economic truth, let's put it like that, but the discourse might go into that direction, and that is a real risk. So I have these two questions about older women and taking up space on the labor market. Thank you.
Now, as an ILO representative, I'm really tempted now to intervene, but I won't. I will abstain. Rather, I will give the floor again to our panelists, whoever would like to respond to these questions. And I think then we will come to the end of this discussion. So the fallacy about unemployment and giving the right to elderly persons to work, and this life cycle approach, which is really important, something also the ILO's Future Work Commission discussed at length, how to look at our working life really in a more holistic way, and the importance of skilling and reskilling. Does any of the panelists like to intervene again? Yeah, please, Mrs. Mahler.
Thank you, but I also would like to encourage you to give us your insights, because the ILO is prominent representing the right to work. And from my perspective, I would just say one word to this life cycle approach. I think we need to rethink the upskilling and the working parts of our life, because what we gained is many years, and hopefully healthy years for older persons. And this is not really taken into account, because now we have 3 stages in our life. First, we get prepared, then we work, then we retire. But I think it would be much easier for all of us if this would be a good mix, and this would be, from my perspective, the life cycle approach, which we need to consider for further engagement in this regard. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Mahler, and since you just invited me, let me just quickly say, if Madam Chair, if you allow, we are almost coming to an end. But indeed, the Ilo Centenary Declaration, which was adopted in 2019, really focuses on the different topics we've discussed today: how to address informality, how to extend social protection floors, and how to invest in skills, considering that the future, especially now as we discuss also recovery from COVID-19, should be greener, should be more inclusive, and will certainly be digital. So that discussion of, in particular, of skills and social protection will be a focus of the International Labour Conference of the ILO in the very near future. And of course, we are, as a specialized agency of the United Nations system, we are very much engaged in this discussion here. We follow this very attentively, and personally, I've taken a lot from this discussion here today. So I'd like to thank everyone. And as many of you said, this is certainly something that should be continued. So I will now just have a final look at the speakers list, which we have at this point really exhausted. I would again thank all the panelists. Sincere thanks for your intervention at the beginning, but also for your engagement throughout the discussion. I'd like to thank also all the delegates, the NGO and other representatives of the national human rights institutions who took the floor. Thank you for sharing your experiences. And Mrs. Franco, Madam Chair, we've been in very good hands with you. So I hand over to you for the closing of this meeting.
Thank you so very much, Madam Moderator. Distinguished delegates, we had a very fruitful, informative, interesting, and inspirational discussion this morning. We had covered a range of topics that certainly needs further discussion. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time for this panel. And I would like to express my appreciation to our panelists for their statements, as well as our participants for their views. That is very well taken, noted of. At this point, I just would like to say before adjourning this meeting that delegations are reminded that this afternoon at 3 p.m., the working group will continue its interactive discussion under the agenda item 6 on the focus area access to justice. Please rejoin the afternoon meeting using the same link that you joined this morning. The virtual meeting room will open at 2 p.m. The interactive panel discussion on right to work and access to the labor market of the open-ended working group on aging is now concluded. The informal meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you very much.